Welcome to the IDP Plus Advice Show. Today we're going to talk about the trade deadline trades that went down and what it means for IDP. We're going to talk about snap counts for IDP, defensive player alignments and positioning, injuries, waiver impacts, etc. So that's where we're going to go. I'm your host, Ricky Rodriguez. You can find me at RickyRod66 on X. Unfortunately, my partner in crime, Shawn Teague, who you can find at Shawn8386 on X. He had another children's sporting event this evening, so he's not able to join, but he will be here Sunday for the Start Sit Show, and which, for those that have been missing it, it's at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central on this same IDP Plus YouTube channel. Thrilled to be with you here today on Tuesday evening, November 4th, to recap week 9 and talk about week 10 and beyond. Of course, as always, you can leave your questions, comments, suggestions on the YouTube channel. And Shawn and I will be periodically reviewing those. And always appreciate a thumbs up for the show, as well as subscribing to the channel if you have not subscribed yet. All right, let's get into all those kind of fun things that we were just talking about, such as the trade deadline stuff and snap counts, etc. And we're going to start in the AFC East with the Buffalo Bills. And I am going to be recording the timestamps to be able to add to the video when you're watching it, so that you can jump around if you want to listen to certain teams. And I am home and not in a hotel room doing this week. All righty. The Bills had 60 snaps versus the Chiefs. One of the big major blows for them this week was Michael Hoyt, who was playing very well, returned from that suspension, had 2 sacks in 2 games, tore his Achilles, out for the year. And that's an unfortunate situation for the Bills. However, they played a heck of a game on defense and had a great scheme against the Chiefs. Now, Terrell Bernard did return to that full-time role after the week before. It was not announced until after the game started that he was only available for an emergency situation, which screwed a lot of people. But he did return to that full-time role. He's still underperforming. He's not necessarily a must-start linebacker, but a lot of people drafted him early that you may be stuck with him, particularly in deeper leagues, but not someone you necessarily need to rely upon. And there's probably potentially better options out there. Probably, potentially. How you like that? Okay, so Matt Milano also returned. He only played 55% of the snaps. We've been talking about this since the beginning of the year. Matt Milano is someone you don't need on your rosters, don't need to keep. He is really a desperate, deep league kind of play. In fact, Dorian Williams was getting some run more as a spy for Patrick Mahomes in that last game versus the Chiefs. So Milano, you can easily drop. Ed Oliver went on injured reserve, of course, and unfortunate with that pectoral injury. He might be back for the playoffs, but no chance for the regular season is the word right now. Deone Walker, the rookie who we've been talking so much about out of Kentucky, his snap count came down all the way to 42%. So it'll be interesting to see if that trend continues. And Daquan Jones was out. So that wasn't exactly a positive sign for Deone Walker after he had that great game a few weeks ago where he had 5 tackles, 4 of which were tackles for losses. In the secondary, Taron Johnson was out. Cam Lewis is actually the person who filled in for him and played the slot in place with Taron. And Cam played basically 100% of the snaps. There was some information out there implying that Cam Lewis was playing the safety position next to Cole Bishop, but my research says that Cam was playing the slot role that Taron Johnson usually plays. But like I said, Taron Johnson was out. Also at cornerback, Tre'Davious White and Max Harrison basically split 50-50, the number 2 cornerback position, with across from Christian Benford. So expect over time that White will take a back seat, and Maxwell Hairston, the rookie, who did have an interception here in his second game, will end up taking more and more snaps here. At the safety position, going back to that real quick, Taylor Rapp was put on IR. Cole Bishop played 100% of the snaps, and he only played 45% deep in this game, which was a great sign. That's hopefully we'll see more of that as time goes on. He had a fantastic game, including 4 pass breakups. Seems like every time there's a big play being made out in the secondary, outside of the Hairston interception, was Cole Bishop doing something nice. Now, Jordan Poyer and Jordan Hancock shared the other safety position next to Bishop. Poyer played 57%, Hancock played 43%. What was interesting is Poyer, when he was in there, only played 29% deep. When Hancock was in there, he played 96% of snaps deep. Not clear if this rotation is going to continue. This could be matchup dependent in terms of, do they want to have a more box safety or have someone deep? Hancock at Ohio State, if I remember correctly, he was a 5th-round draft pick, but he played both cornerback and safety, so he does have some versatility there. So it'll be interesting to see. My guess is similar to what I was saying with Harrison over White, that with Rapp on IR and out for the year and Hamlin on IR and not back anytime soon, this could evolve to seeing more Hancock on the field, but I'm not picking up either Poyer or Hancock. Okay, let's move to the Miami Dolphins now. And the Dolphins played 56 snaps versus the Ravens. Jalen Phillips, I told you we talk about trade deadlines, and Jalen Phillips is the first one we're going to talk about here. Sent to the Philadelphia Eagles for a 3rd-round draft pick. I think many of you might be aware, but just in case, Vic Fangio was a defensive coordinator for the Miami Dolphins for a period of time, and during that time, he coached Jalen Phillips. So Phillips should be familiar with Vic Fangio's defensive system as he goes to Philadelphia. Fangio is the defensive coordinator in Philadelphia. Now, we'll talk about Phillips a little bit more when we get to Philadelphia, okay? But I will mention that in his last game, Phillips played 80% of the snaps, which was 45 snaps in total. Bradley Chubb played 73% of the snaps, and of course, he did not get traded, and I'm guessing he was pretty disappointed and bummed that he was not traded, but he is still with the Dolphins and will be the, quote, number 1 edge player for the Dolphins. He'll probably play about 80% of the snaps, so he could be a volume-based player for you as we move forward. Chop Robinson only played 9% of the snaps. That's because he left with a concussion. He should see an increase in playing time with healthy. But I do still expect it to be a Judon Chop Robinson rotation, more so on that other edge. Remember, Chop last year, while he had that streak where he had a sack almost every game for several weeks in a row from the middle of the season towards about 3/4 of the season in 2024, still was not like above 60% of the snaps in most weeks. He just doesn't have the bulk for that run defense, so that's why I expect Judon and Chop to have this platoon thing. And in many cases, I think you see Chubb and Chop and Judon on the field at the same time. At linebacker, Brooks and Dodson had their normal workloads. At safety, Ashton Davis was out. Ifeatu Melifonwu played 10 snaps, and I know it's hard to believe in Melifonwu, but after 10 snaps, he got hurt yet again. I believe it was a toe in this particular case. So with that, Dante Trader, the rookie out of Maryland, came in and played 91% of the snaps. He played 63% of those snaps close to the line of scrimmage and led the team with 13 tackles, 8 of which were solo. With Melifonwu's history of injury, with Davis's injury of history, Dante Trader in your deeper leagues is someone that I am willing to take a gamble on and start adding to my bench. Not ready to shove him into my lineup quite yet, but I think he moves into the starting lineup next to Minka, who, by the way, played only 45% of the snaps deep, and he played 55% close to the line of scrimmage. Was that tied to trying to make sure they shut down the run game and Derrick Henry, as we saw in previous teams try and do and move their safeties closer to the box? That very well could have been a one-game thing. So that's part of the risk, particularly with Trader, and that's why we might want to pick him up and watch, but not necessarily put him into our starting lineups right now. Okay, let's move to the Patriots here. The Patriots only played 56 snaps against the Falcons. So as a reminder for some, and if you're new to this show, about 65 snaps has been the average number of snaps defenses have been playing this year in 2025. So 56 snaps is on the lower side. Starting at the linebacker position, Robert Spillane played basically 100% of the snaps, but didn't do much for us. He's had this up and down kind of year, and because they're playing that man defense as opposed to zone defense a little bit more, that has certainly impacted Spillane's productivity. Christian Ellis looked like he was grabbing a little bit more of that number 2 linebacker role with that massive rotation they had, but he got hurt. Jack Gibbons picked up the most snaps and played 45% in total for the game, which isn't exactly a lot. Marte Mapu still played 16%. Jelani Tavai played 11%. So in deep leagues, if Christian Ellis is out, maybe you consider Gibbons. But once again, he's only getting about 60% of the snaps is going to be my guess. And on top of that, Gibbons, unlike Ellis, does not have defensive line eligibility in sleeper leagues. Okay. Kayvon Chason played 73% of the snaps, now up to a career high 5.5 sacks. Sorry, 5.5 sacks. Career high for him from LSU. As a side note, he is basically sack dependent. He's not getting a ton of tackles, but in big play scoring systems for sacks in deeper leagues, someone you can consider. Harold Landry, as FYI, played 80% of the snaps. At the safety position, Jalen Hawkins played 100%. Woodson played 96%. Hawkins only played 52% deep. Woodson played only 57% deep. So feels like there was a rotation there with basically one single high where the two of them were rotating for the most part. Okay. The Jets were on a bye, so let's move on to the Jets here. As I record the timestamps. But they were active on the trade market. Sauce Gardner traded to the Colts. Quinnen Williams traded to the Cowboys. The Jets did get Mozzie Smith back in return in that Quinnen Williams deal besides the draft picks. Michael Carter II was also traded previously to the Eagles. So what does that mean for the Jets as we look ahead? The rookie out of Florida State, Azariah Thomas, will be the cornerback that replaces Sauce Gardner. Very confident in saying that. Also very confident saying that Jarvis Brownlee will be the slot cornerback in replace of Michael Carter II. That makes Jarvis Brownlee very attractive in cornerback required leagues, particularly once again when the Jets play teams that play a lot of 3 wide. Really like that for Brownlee. At the defensive tackle position, in place of Quinnen Williams, no, you're not going after Jay Tufele. No, you're not going after Jawan Briggs. No, you're not going after Mozzie Smith. It doesn't matter who they put in there. You're not picking up those guys for your defensive tackle required positions in those types of leagues. Okay? The other thing to watch about Azariah Thomas, as a rookie, he could get picked on a decent amount on the outside. And and Darian Porter's an example of that. We'll talk about that when we get to the Raiders a little bit later. So Thomas is someone to monitor to see how much he gets targeted and does that create a lot of tackle opportunities for him and maybe make him valuable in cornerback required leagues. Okay, moving to the Baltimore Ravens now, who played 64 snaps against the Dolphins. Of course, they acquired Draymond Jones from the Titans, and remember, they had previously traded away Odafe Oweh. Now, on the defensive line, Tavius Robinson was put on IR a couple of weeks ago. It's not clear if he's going to be out for the full year. Rumor is that he will be coming back at some point. Nnamdi Madubuike and Broderick Washington, both on IR, both are out for the year. Washington with an Achilles, Madubuike with his neck. So do I believe that Draymond Jones enters into the edge conversation for the Ravens? Yes, I do. And he's been playing very well with 4.5 sacks in the last 4 weeks. I believe I even joked last week that he's playing really hard to try and get traded, and it worked. He got out of Tennessee and ended up in Baltimore. Now, the fear I have with Draymond Jones is that Baltimore uses him as he was used in Seattle because of their injuries on the interior. So instead of rushing from the edge, do we see him more on the interior in place of the likes of a Brent Urban, for example, or taking Travis Jones off the field, or any of these guys, that is a high risk and a high probability, which I think will significantly impact his IDP stats. In addition to that, I recorded it here. In his last 4 weeks, he played between 74 and 83% of the snaps, including 83 this past Sunday. I do not expect that he will come anywhere near 83% of the snaps. I expect him in the 60 to 65% range, which will also impact his IDP stats. As I think there'll be this, when he does get some edge snaps, there's Mike Green, there's Kyle Van Noy, there's David Ojabo. All of those at 72% for Green, Van Noy 61%, Ojabo 55% this past week. I think that, he just gets thrown into that mix. Mike Green's percent comes down a little bit as a side note. If you're hoping that Green would continue, I think Jones would take some of those snaps away. But I just don't think this bodes as well for Jones as if he would have stayed in Tennessee. Moving to the linebacker position, Roquan Smith played 100% of the snaps. Teddy Buchanan was down to 69%. But Buchanan is very, very efficient from a tackling perspective, even at just that very nice 69%. The Ravens have moved to 3 full-time starting safeties for the second week in a row. This looks to be their new scheme and not just a trend. And that coincided with the acquisition of Aloy Gilman from the Chargers when they traded Oweh over to the Chargers for Gilman. So you have Starks and Gilman playing those safety roles. Kyle Hamilton is playing more towards the line of scrimmage, which is eating to some of Buchanan's snaps. In fact, Hamilton played 91% of his snaps close to the line of scrimmage. Once again, for those that are new, when I say close to the line of scrimmage, it means they played either on the D-line, in the slot, or in the box. Okay, that's what I mean when I say close to the line of scrimmage, which you'll hear periodically throughout the show. So Kyle Hamilton, giddy up, thumbs up with that kind of usage. Marlon Humphrey played 95% of the snaps, but he only played 33% close to the line of scrimmage. He played 67% on the outside, which is not great. So he was the outside cornerback primarily, along with Wiggins. Moved inside in 3 wide with Awuzie taking the third cornerback spot when other teams went 3 wide, the Dolphins in this case. So if that's going to continue for Humphrey, we have a little bit of a risk unless the Ravens are playing a team that uses a lot of 3 wide. So be careful of that. They, of course, also traded Jair Alexander. That has no impact because Jair was hardly playing for Baltimore, so nothing to worry about there. Let's move to the Cincinnati Bengals here. The Cincinnati Bengals played 80 snaps in a very exciting game against the Bears. But then at the same time, boy, as a Bengals fan, you've got to be heartbroken to see all those points scored and the defense just giving it up like that. But let's talk about the Bengals defense. Trey Hendrickson was out for that game. He was not traded. Of course, he did not practice at all last week, and they called him doubtful. You had to know he was out when he didn't practice any of the 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. They label him day-to-day, but we need to see some practice time before we can start getting excited about him getting back into lineups. Shamar Stewart, it's being rumored that he's still trying to dig himself out of the hole that Darnell Wright, the right tackle for the Bears, absolutely planted him in. By the way, in the sarcasm meter, that's about an 11 or a 12 on a scale of 1 to 10. Plus, Stewart got injured again on top of that. McKinley Jackson asked to be traded after only playing 6 snaps all year. Maybe he should get a little bit better at his craft before requesting a trade. He's not even getting on the field against this bad Bengals defense, folks. I'm guessing that there weren't teams lining up calling the Bengals offering high draft picks or even low draft picks for that matter for McKinley Jackson. But kudos to the Bengals for holding on to him, okay? So that was about a 15 on a scale of 1 to 10 on the sarcasm meter, but I just had to mention that. 6 snaps all year, and he's asking to be traded, and he hasn't done nothing in his career. All right, moving to the linebacker position. Barrett Carter, 100% of the snaps. double digit tackles in 3 of the 4 games that he has started, which is fantastic. Demetrius Knight down to 78% of snaps, continues to fluctuate between high 70s, high 80s in terms of snap count. That's what you can expect from him. Still almost a full-time role. I wouldn't quite consider that a full-time role, but with the number of plays that are on the field, such as the 80 that the Bengals run the field this week versus an average of 65, that's almost a whole extra quarter per game. I think he can continue playing Knight in deeper leagues. Of course, Logan Wilson was traded to the Cowboys. We'll talk about that when we get to the Cowboys. Oren Burks becomes the number 3 linebacker for the Bengals, but he really has no value, so we're not worried about that. At the safety position, Jordan Battles had 12 tackles in this game. He played 64% of the snaps deep. Now, he leads all defensive backs in tackles with 70 on the season. And I do want to thank Shawn, because even though Shawn couldn't join, he and I combined our notes, and that was one of the notes that he brought up. Now, Battle was also the person that blew that tackle against Colston Loveland that gave the Bears the winning touchdown with whatever that was, 17 seconds left in the game. With a little bit of honorable mention of Geno Stone, who was also back there, that could have helped try and tackle, but kind of watch Battle mess it up. Okay, with that being said, I have to admit, even though Battle is getting all these tackles, I wouldn't be surprised if when they come out of the bye, because they are going in bye in week 10, that you see a different starting safety back there instead of Battle. When they come back from the bye and start practicing, we want to check some of the beat writer reports and see if we can pick up on anything. But I'm a little bit nervous about Jordan Battle, particularly after that. And, I mean, everybody saw what happened. Cam Taylor-Britt, for the second week in a row, returned to the number 3 cornerback position. But remember, Dax Hill is the cornerback we want for the Bengals, who plays outside and then to start, and then moves inside to the slot on 3 wide, which is great for him, and he's been 100% of the snaps. That's what we like. That's what we want. Okay, now moving to the Cleveland Browns. The Browns had a bye this past week. Carson Schlesinger, you may recall, had this ankle sprain before they went on bye in the 4th quarter, when you wonder, should he have been in the game? They do expect him to be out this week and maybe another week or 2 beyond that. So that means an increase in playing time, most likely for Devin Bush, as well as Mahmoud Diabate, not Jerome Baker. I would expect Bush to be in that 95% range, and expect Diabate to be in that 80% range. So we'll see how this plays out, but that's what I am expecting. Now, they did trade Joe Tryon-Shoyinka to the Bears. We'll talk about that when we get to the Bears. The only impact to see with this happening to the Browns defensive ends, Myles Garrett was already playing a substantial amount of snaps, but I could see Alex Wright, who, I've joked about earlier in the year, him and Isaiah McGuire both, but Alex Wright has really come on strong. I would expect those two to pick up a few more percentage of those snaps, along with Cameron Thomas becoming the 4th defensive end, but him way down at maybe 18% of the snaps or something along those lines. So that could be good news, particularly for Alex Wright. Okay, so that's the Browns with them being on bye. Let's move to the Steelers here. The Steelers played a whopping 78 snaps against the Colts in that big upset against the Colts. Let's start with the edge position. Some very interesting snap counts. TJ Watt, only 78%. Alex Highsmith, 62%. Nick Herbig bumped all the way back up to 51%. Remember, this was not a blowout game. This was a 28-21 final. Herbig, we were cautioned about playing because when Highsmith came back from injured reserve, Herbig went down to that mid 30% range. Now, this past week, he goes up to the, I just mentioned it, 51%. However, they did play 78 snaps, which is an unusually high amount of snaps. Did Herbig get more snaps just because of the number of snaps the defense played in total? I think that's a risk. So on the one hand, while you get excited for Herbig and a little bit worried about Watt and Highsmith, I think it's just because of the 78 snaps. So I'm still not ready to put Herbig in my lineup. I'm still comfortable playing Watt, who got that strip sack and also recovered the fumble that he caused. Alex Highsmith, 62% of the snaps, 4 tackles, and 2 sacks in what was deemed as a bad matchup because the Colts really had been protecting Daniel Jones quite well and was projected not to be a good matchup for the Steelers' edge players, but both Watt and Highsmith came through, particularly in big play scoring leads. Cam Hayward's snap count came down to 65% after being at 83 and 74% the past couple of weeks. Once again, tied to the 78 snaps most likely. Derek Harmon, the rookie, though, was all the way down to 42% after being plus 60% or around 60% the previous 3 games. So probably a little bit of concern for the rookie there, and maybe they need him to take a step back. And Yaya Black, and I forgot who the 5th person was that got some snaps in his place. Big game for Peyton Wilson at linebacker. Cole Holcomb ruled out with the illness. With that, even though Malik Harrison came back from IR, and we were worried Harrison would take some of those Holcomb snaps, and he took a few. Harrison played 29% of the snaps, but Peyton Wilson ended up playing 85% of the snaps and had a big game, including 14 tackles and an interception. Given the way the Steelers had their best defensive performance of the year against the Colts offense that has been pretty much a juggernaut this year, I expect that Wilson will not give up many snaps to Holcomb, even if Holcomb is back this coming week with the type of performance that Wilson had and that the Steelers defense had overall. Related to that, let's go to the safety position. Chuck Clark was out. Jabril Peppers was out. Deshaun Elliott was on IR. Kyle Duggar, who they just acquired from the Patriots, got thrust into a full-time role. We were wondering what was going to happen with him and Thornhill and Ramsey. Well, it was announced on Saturday, and I must admit I did not see that even before the start-sit show on Sunday morning, that Tomlin told a beat writer that Ramsey was going to play full-time safety. And then Duggar played the other full-time role. Juan Thornhill was left on the, let's just call it the curbside, for lack of a better term, or on the bench, whatever you want to call it. Now, Duggar wasn't very productive in his first game with the Steelers. It was his first game, but he also played 67% of the snaps deep, which is not his strength. Part of that was because they were trying to, it feels like, keep everything, quote, in front of them, the Colts offense, for lack of a better term, because Jalen Ramsey, who played the other full-time safety role, also played 71% of his snaps deep. So is it a permanent move for Ramsey? According to Mike Tomlin, he confirmed today that he will continue to play exclusively at safety, Jalen Ramsey. And once again, because they played so well against the juggernaut Colts offense that we've seen to date, they're going to leave Ramsey in that role. That is bad news for Ramsey, particularly if they're using him in that deep safety role and they're using him to call the signals and in terms of things in front of him. Granted, Patrick Queen still wears the green dot, but Ramsey is kind of coordinating with the defensive backs and all. It's part of the reason they liked him back there. So this is bad news for Ramsey. I'm not ready to drop him yet in cornerback required leagues. And in fact, we usually love it when a person has cornerback eligibility, but is being used as a safety. The problem is if he's being used as this deep safety on 70% of the snaps plus, that's going to be a problem for productivity. So I'm benching him for a week if I have him in cornerback required leagues to see if that changes. If it doesn't change, bye-bye Jalen Ramsey. Brandon Echols ended up playing the slot cornerback position as an FYI. Back to Duggar. If Clark is back, Shawn thinks that Clark is going to move back into the starting role in Duggar's place. I'm not as confident. So unless we hear Tomlin announcing something, I'm probably not playing Duggar or Clark. Or if Peppers is active, I'm not playing him either. And I really want to see a week where they're all active and we really see how this shakes out. Okay. That completes the AFC North. And let's move to the Houston Texans and the AFC South here. And the Texans only played 63 snaps versus the Broncos. As Shawn put it, this is our weekly public service announcement to not trust the number 2 linebacker for the Texans. I know some people played Henry To'o because they were desperate and they might have gotten a little bit lucky in that this week he played 85% of the snaps, while EJ Speed was down to 30% of the snaps. So the week before they kind of split it roughly 50-50, let's just call it. But this week it bounced up to Toto and it bounced down for Speed. If you want to gamble on that, go for it. But boy, that's pretty risky. Maybe in deep leagues you go with Toto. On the edges, Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter both played over 80% of the snaps, with Hunter at 86%. I know some people are frustrated with Hunter, but he's still number 2 defensive end/edge, in my opinion, and you keep on rolling him out if you play 2 defensive end/edges. Danico Autry, fun fact, thanks to Shawn as well. And I do want to thank Shawn. Shout out to Shawn Teague, Shawn8386 on X, for some of these interesting stats and notes that he helped compile with me and for me. So Danico Autry blocked his 13th career kick, tying Julius Peppers for second most since 1991, which is, I believe, when they started tracking it. Now, for fantasy, he's not startable. It's a cool milestone because Autry only played 22% of the snaps on defense. He's been in the 20% basically since he's been activated since IR. Can't play him with that kind of snap count and can't rely on block kicks, assuming you get scoring for block kicks in your league. We had a back to the future with the Texans where when MJ Stewart had to start playing at the safety position due to other injuries, he had played roughly about 60% a couple of weeks ago, with Petrie playing 100%, playing mostly safety, and then moving into the slot, once again, because of the matchup situation. Last week, Stewart played, in the 90 to 100% range because of the matchups where Petrie had to play so much in the slot and basically played almost, 100% of his snaps in the slot. This week was another matchup against the Broncos where Petrie and Bullock basically played 100% snaps at the safeties, and Stewart was back down 65%. You can't trust MJ Stewart, folks. He's just a guy. He is a professional football player, don't get me wrong, but he's not someone we want for our IDP teams. A side note, Jimmy Ward is reportedly getting closer to his 21-day window to begin practicing and activated off the IR. May begin fairly soon, and I can see Ward moving into that role for MJ Stewart. But once again, at age 33 and with some of the problems Ward has, I wouldn't expect him to have any different playing time than what we've seen with Stewart here. Okay? That is your Texans. Let us move to the Indianapolis Colts, who played 62 snaps against the Steelers. Zaire Franklin played 100%. Jermaine Pratt played a surprising 92% after last week getting pulled off the field on obvious passing situations. Of course, the Steelers, their average depth of target was about 2 yards, and it worked for them. They won. So there wasn't, and with all the tight end usage, there wasn't a need for Pratt to come off the field. Now, my man Shawn, who I was just talking about, feels more confident in Pratt than I do. He's like, he definitely trusted more than Franklin. I'm not quite there, and I'm not so sure that he will on a regular basis have more tackles than Franklin, even though he did lead the team, he being Pratt, in tackles with 8 this past game. So Shawn and I are a little bit on different sides of the fence on this one, but my gut is saying that Steelers offense and all the tight ends and the average depth of target being so low that when they play a regular offense, you see Pratt coming off the field in obvious passing situations. Jalen Carley, still no word on him with his 21-day window being open. So we're still waiting to see if that's going to happen and if he maybe becomes the passing down alternative to Jermaine Pratt. Samson Ebukam and Tyquan Lewis were both out for this game. So that meant Latu played 89% of the snaps. Kwity Paye played 84% of the snaps. Check his box score to see how much Paye did with that snap count. JT Tuimoloau, the rookie out of Ohio State, only played 18%. So that was basically your edge rotation for this game. So with that, Latu, with all the snaps, got 2.5 sacks, and he continues to perform extremely well. the breakout we're expecting, particularly with the pass rush win rate per PFF that he was continuing to improve in, is really starting to pan out. But Tyquan Lewis will probably be back this week. Ebicon will be back another week or two. And with that, that snap count will go down for Latu, and pay, of course. You're not going to pay. You're not playing Quiddy Pay. Hopefully you aren't. And that'll impact some of Latu's stats. But if he keeps performing like that, maybe they finally break that rotation and give him a more than an average share compared to the rest of them. But throughout the year prior to these injuries with Ebicon and Lewis, it's been this heavy rotation in all of them in that 50 to 40% range. Colts traded for Sauce Gardner. Talked about that earlier. I expect Gardner and Jalen Johnson to start on the outside. Excuse me, not Jalen Johnson. Jalen Jones to start on the outside for the Colts. I expect Kenny Moore to play in the slot. In the past, Kenny Moore would start on the outside and then move into the slot and 3 wide. It was part of the reason we love Kenny Moore. And he was willing to make the tackles, and they would blitz him periodically from that slot, etc. New defensive scheme. Now they've added Sauce Gardner on top of that. If you look at Kenny Moore's snap counts the last 3 weeks, 73% this week, 52% the week before, 79% the week before that. That is more of a pure slot cornerback type of snap count as opposed to outside and slot. And on top of that, Charvarius Ward is on IR, and he will come back at some point, throwing a 4th cornerback into the mix. I think Ward might end up replacing Jalen Jones, and Kenny Moore's role might stay the same, but Kenny Moore's snap count is not enough for what we need. For those that have had Kenny Moore for as long as I have in one dynasty league, and I did release at the beginning of the year, it was more because of the age, and I wanted someone like Dax Hill, who was a heavy tackler, in his spot. But Kenny Moore is someone, try and trade high, but I wouldn't fault you for releasing him at this point in time. Okay, let's move to the Jacksonville Jaguars, folks, who played 64 snaps against the Raiders. Ventrell Miller played 91% of the snaps, filling in for Devin Lloyd. Hopefully he joined us for the start-sit show. We got asked for our prediction, and both Shawn and I were on the bandwagon that we expected him to be out, and he was out, and he played in the late window, and that's why people were asking. And we were right on that one. We've been right on many, but that was another one we were right on. Oluokun did play 100% of the snaps, Miller 91%. Now, Lloyd was very close to playing. I do expect him to play this coming week, and that means Ventrell Miller, bye, 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 as Backstreet Boys would say. And there's a reason I don't sing very often, but bye-bye to Ventrell Miller, Devin Lloyd moving back. I've called it out several times. I want to call it out one more time, particularly for our new listeners. Devin Lloyd had a bunch of big plays that are not necessarily sustainable. If you look at his tackle counts, they weren't exactly, in the 9, 10, 11 range every week. They were much lower than that if you go and look at his tackle count week over week. Be careful about getting too excited about Devin Lloyd, by the way. And even though he's coming back, you kind of wonder if he's fully going to be 100%, which also impacts those big plays that he was creating. I'll just leave it at that. Okay. We're going to go back to the sarcasm meter here for a second. Trayvon Walker only played 47% of the snaps, and do you know why? He threw a right cross right directly into a helmet of a Las Vegas Raider, okay, right in front of a referee. So obviously he got thrown out. Now remember, this is the same guy that has a cast on his left arm because he's got a broken wrist, and he's swinging his right one against a helmet, okay, and gets thrown out. Let's just say that's not the smartest thing in the world to do. But he did it anyway. So that's just not freaking smart, Trayvon Walker. So on the sarcasm meter, that's above a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. Come on, man. Don't break your other wrist. And you've been sucking anyway playing with that one cast on your arm. Now, the only thing I'll say is he had been playing in the mid-20% range with that cast on his wrist. He was up to 47% before he got thrown out. So, but if you look at his stats, it's not like he registered a sack and a half like Josh Hines-Allen did. So I'm still waiting for Walker to get rid of that cast and hopefully, or maybe even a smaller cast, things along those lines, which it did look like it was a smaller cast this past week. I've been keeping out of my lineups, but I haven't been dumping him because I do love his upside when he's healthy and when he's not throwing freaking punches in front of a referee. Okay. In the secondary, Jordan Lewis got hurt on the first play. Travis Hunter, of course, got put on IR. That means that Jerry Jones moved into the slot role, a fairly high draft pick from the past, either a second or third round. I can't remember off the top of my head. But he played 73% of the snaps and, from what I recall, was pretty productive. I forgot to record the stats in my notes here. So Jerry Jones, if Jordan Lewis is out, boy, remember, Jordan Lewis was very effective playing the slot. However, Lewis was also playing outside and the slot, where Jones looks like was playing almost just in the slot. So, but we'll keep an eye on that for you. Don't pick up Jones yet, but just something to keep an eye on. Eric Murray went to IR. Andrew Wingard played 100% of the snaps. He played 56% deep, meaning 44% close to the line of scrimmage. Antonio Johnson took over the role of Eric Murray in terms of playing time, playing 97%. He only played 53% of the snaps deep as well. So once again, it feels like there was a single high where the two of them were rotating, one deep and one close to the line of scrimmage during the game. All right, let's move over to the Tennessee Titans here, folks. And the Tennessee Titans played 65 snaps, which is right on par, right on average for most teams this year against the Los Angeles Chargers. Quoting my man Sean Teague, and you'll hear this a second time here, Cody Barton sucks. He was bailed out by that pick six, but again, once again, 100% of the snaps, and he gets a boring 6 tackles. Compliments of my man Sean. But that's what we've been seeing from Cody Barton. That's what we've been telling you. He has gotten a few big plays, like a fumble recovery, another interception in previous games. That's keeping him afloat. But you got to, for these linebackers, you got to have the tackles, and he's just not doing them on a week-to-week basis. But someone who is, freaking Cedric Gray, fighting to start at the beginning of the year. James Williams looked like was going to start ahead of him during the preseason, to where James Williams went inactive. One week they pull up Kaiser White from the practice squad and don't play Cedric Gray after playing him the week before. But now Cedric Gray is basically playing 90+% of the snaps every week. He was 92 this past week. He had 16 tackles, 11 of which were solo, got his first career sack, which is phenomenal for him. And he is amazingly second in the league in tackles through week 9 with 90. Now, considering he's not playing a full 100%, they sat him out of game and he's second in tackles. That's pretty freaking awesome. Now, is he as good a football player as he is for IDP stats? Not necessarily, but the Titans don't have anybody else. So they're going to be rolling with Cedric Gray, and we're going to lock him in and keep on playing Cedric Gray. Now, moving to the edge, we talked about Draymond Jones with the Ravens earlier and what it means with him and the Ravens. Let's talk about what it means for the Titans. Now, remember, Femi Oladejo, the second-round rookie out of UCLA, went to injured reserve. Ali Gay, I know this from LSU, I get it, but he was a deep reserve that was at least get a little bit playing time. He got put on injured reserve. Arden Key, also from LSU, he was injured. So with that, Draymond Jones played 83% of the snaps. Jihad Ward played 88% of the snaps. Jihad Ward had 2.5 sacks, bringing him to 3.5 sacks in total over the last 3 weeks. And as Sean pointed out, Jihad Ward has defensive tackle eligibility in MFL, which if he's getting that kind of volume of snaps, playing the edge with defensive tackle eligibility, very nice pickup to consider. And if you're wondering if he's going to continue to play those snaps, okay, this is going to be another one for the sarcasm meter here for a second here. But are you going to run to the waiver wire for Jalen Harrell, CJ Ravenall, or Truman Jones? That's who else is on their roster right now, folks. Now, if Arden Key comes back, I expect Arden Key to play 80+% of the snaps along with Jihad Ward. And these other guys picking up 10 to 20%, give or take to round it out. But that's how this is going to play out. So both Ward and Key, just from being on the field so much, have a very excellent opportunity to rack up some IDP stats. So keep that in mind, particularly in MFL where Ward has defense tackle eligibility. At the cornerback position, of course, they've traded Roger McCreary. We've talked about that previously. We'll mention again when we get to the Rams. But as predicted, it was Armour Davis and Baker playing 100% of the snaps, and Marcus Harris playing 43% of the snaps as the third cornerback. Xavier Woods was out at safety. The good news is Amani Hooker played actually over 90% of the snaps this week, with Woods being out. He played 92%, 72% close to the line of scrimmage, which was fantastic for Hooker. Quandre Diggs played 89%. He played 72% deep. Kevin Winston Jr. played 40% of the snaps for the second week in a row. He played 50% deep. Woods' injury isn't supposed to be long-term. He could be back as soon as week 11. They are on bye in week 10. So with that, I expect Hooker to lose some snaps and expect this to continue to be a hodgepodge. And I don't want to play any of these guys unless we see something else happening to where two guys are playing basically 90+% of the snaps, which is a similar message that I've been given the last week or two. All right, let's move to the AFC West and the Denver Broncos. Broncos played 73 snaps against the Texans. Alex Singleton played 100% of the snaps at linebacker. The big surprise, Dre Greenlaw only played 27 defensive snaps, which is 37%. Now, Greenlaw has tended to be a hyper-efficient tackler, and luckily he did get 8 tackles and a sack on those lowly 27 defensive snaps. If he can get more full-time snaps, boy, what a stud. But Justin Sternard played 42% of the snaps because he was theoretically, quote, playing so well in Greenlaw's absence. I still think over time we're going to see Greenlaw playing more and more snaps. If we can get him up to the 80% snap range, even if it's not in the 90s, but the 80 with his hyper-efficient tackling, Greenlaw's someone we're going to want to play in our lineups, at least at a number 3 linebacker, if not a number 2. Now, Nick Bonito, moving to the edge position, has gone 3 straight weeks without a sack. Jonathan Cooper did have a sack, and now he has 7 on the season. But I want to talk snap counts here, and it's really, really interesting. Okay, now this game wasn't a blowout. Remember, it was 18-15, if I remember right, was the final score between Denver and Houston. Bonito only played 56% of the snaps. The previous 2 weeks, he's only played 54 and 62%. So his snap count has come down, and his sacks have come down with it. Cooper played 40% this past week, only 49 and 48 the previous 2 weeks. The way it was kind of in a rotation, it was sort of Cooper and Bonito in that, let's call it 65 to 70% range, give or take. And Dondre Tillman and Jonah Ellis playing the other 35% or so snaps, okay? That's how it kind of was going. But what's now happening is Dondre Tillman, Jonah Ellis, and Q Robinson, the 3 of them added to Bonito and Cooper. So 5 people rotating for those 2 spots. Tillman played 38%, Jonah Ellis 32%, sort of what they had been playing. But then Q Robinson also played 38% of the snaps on defense. Between those 3, that's basically 102% of the snaps. Okay, so that's one of 2 positions. And then with Bonito at 56 and Cooper at 40%, that's 96%. So you can see what's happening here. This massive, ugly rotation. I'm not giving up on Bonito or Cooper yet. But if they're going to move Q Robinson to this, and once again, this was a close game. So in closer games, like you studs maybe play a little bit more. But no, they actually went deeper with 5. Worrisome and something to watch. Don't give up on Bonito and Cooper yet, but boy, we're going to keep an eye on this for another week. Zach Allen, only 66% of the snaps, but boy, he had one hell of a game. He was playing almost 90% last year. It has continued to trim down to, throughout the year, from the 80s to the 70s and to now, in this case, 66%. But if he's that effective and efficient on lower snaps, I'm okay with that. Don't wear him out. Don't let him get hurt. And he's super productive. Of course, this was against the Houston Texans offensive line. So that certainly helped in terms of allowing him to be that successful. I certainly would like to see his snap count go up. Maybe not all the way to 90, but I certainly prefer to see him 75% at least. But I'm not benching him for the record. Surtain was out at cornerback, so we had Riley Moss playing 100% of the snaps, basically all outside. Chris Abrams Strain out of Missouri played 59% of the snaps, but he played 95% of those out wide. Jahdae Barron, the rookie, played 47% of the snaps, and he played 77% of those out wide. Jaquan McMillan played 70% of the snaps. 98% of those were in the slot/box. So McMillan is right now controlling that slot position. There was a little bit of a rotation happening with McMillan and Barron, but with the injury to Surtain, now they're going to use Barron. It looks like a little bit more of the outside and some sort of rotation. So while Surtain's out, you might be able to get away with putting McMillan in the slot in your cornerback position. But notice I use the term might. Depends on your other options. But if Broncos going to play teams that play a lot of three wide, and McMillan with us be on the field quite a bit, and if Barons and Abrams Strain are playing on the outside along with Moss, McMillan could be productive for you there. Brandon Jones played 64% of his snaps deep. Hufanga played 36% of the snaps deep. 64 and 36 adds to 100. Once again, one single high with Brandon Jones playing a little bit more single high than Hufanga. You can look up the stats and see what that means for when you look at Hufanga's tackles and so forth versus Brandon Jones this past week. Let's talk about the Chiefs here. And let me be sure to timestamp that. They played 66 snaps versus the Bills. Nick Bolton put up 14 tackles. Played 100% of the snaps, which was fantastic. They actually played a good team who kept them on the field for an average amount of snaps, which contributed to that success for Bolton. Now, Tranquil played 92% of the snaps, but didn't do a whole lot from a tackling perspective in this game. Shamari Connor played his typical 100%. He played 74% close to the line of scrimmage. At the other safety position, though, Brian Cook and Chris Roland Wallace shared it, not Jaden Hicks. Cook 76%, Chris Roland Wallace 24%. That adds up to 100. Jaden Hicks played 74% of snaps the week before, and part of that was because Cook got hurt a little bit, got dinged up. They must have not liked what they seen, because in this game, it was Cook and Roland Wallace, and Hicks played a total of 4 snaps, 6%. And this was versus the Bills. So this wasn't a blowout type of game. This wasn't we're going to give others opportunities because we're playing a weaker opponent, and Jaden Hicks sat on the bench. So bad news for Jaden Hicks. Good news for Trent McDuffie. 12 tackles and added a sack. He only played 32% out wide. He played 68% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage, which is how he was used very early on in his career when he was a top 12 IDP cornerback and where we loved him. We love this. Now, was this because of the Buffalo Bills matchup and they weren't really concerned about Keon Coleman or Tyrell Shavers, and that's why they moved him inside? It is a possibility. But if this would continue for second week in a row, we would be really excited. So we love us some Trent McDuffie in this role. And maybe because he was so effective in it, maybe they'll decide to leave him in that role. But boy, I'd be trying to figure out how to get Trent McDuffie on my roster if he's available on waivers for some reason, because it's particularly in a shallow league, or if you're conjuring up a trade as dynasty and redraft trade deadlines are starting to come up over the next 1 to 3 weeks, depending on your league. And if you can get maybe some trade going and get McDuffie to be thrown in, that could be quite the benefit for you. Okay? Let's move to Los Angeles Raiders here. The Raiders played 80 snaps against the Jaguars. Devin White for the second week in a row, 16 tackles. From LSU as a side note. Now, of course, this happens when you play 81 snaps one week and 80 snaps the following week. You're basically playing 5 quarters of games, 2 weeks in a row. So you should get 16 tackles. So kudos to Devin White for actually coming through, unlike a Cody Barton or a Kenneth Murray, who wouldn't do that. Okay. Landon Roberts played 93% of the snaps the week before, 74% the previous week before that, all the way down to 60% this week. And Jamal Adams was actually all the way down to 21%, despite him being fairly effective on limited snaps. It was down from the mid 30s down to 21%, which was surprising. Max Crosby is still a beast, playing 95+% of the snaps. Malcolm Kuntz was back down to 50%. Tyree Wilson was back down to 39%. Unfortunately, for those of us hoping for breakouts for those two, it's just not happening. I alluded to this gentleman earlier. Darian Porter appeared to take over the starting job for Caillou Blue Kelly. Caillou Blue Kelly didn't play a single snap on defense. Porter played 100% of the snaps. Porter had 10 tackles. As I alluded to earlier in the show, you got a rookie here getting his first start, and they targeted him, and they targeted him, and they targeted him. The good news is he's willing to make tackles. So that feels like a lot like Jalen Jones from last year with the Colts. So he is someone that's worth targeting in cornerback required leagues, because there's no indication whatsoever that Caillou Blue Kelly, will move back into that role. Caillou Blue Kelly is a journeyman. Darren Porter, they use a 3rd-round pick on. He's a former wide receiver who got converted cornerback. So the Raiders, with where they are right now, are going to, I would assume, continue to want to play their younger guys and give them experience and develop them. So I expect Porter to continue playing. And as mentioned, someone to target in cornerback required leagues as a result. Let's go to the Chargers here to wrap up the AFC West and the AFC in total. Chargers only played 47 snaps against the Titans offense, okay? You'll hear defenses only playing 40 snaps, 40 in the 40s from a snap perspective when they're playing these bad offenses like the Titans, like the Saints. But that's the equivalent of basically only playing 3 quarters of a game as opposed to, like the Raiders are playing 5 quarters. When you only play 47 snaps, you're basically playing a little bit less than 3 quarters almost there. So not so great for being able to put up IDP stats. On the edge, Tuli Tuipulotu and Khalil Mack both played 66% of the snaps. Now, Odafe Owe did record 2 sacks. He only played 49% of the snaps. And it was against the Titans, who we've been saying, use edge players against the Titans, and even Odafe Owe can come up with 2 sacks in those situations. Don't chase him outside of deeper leagues, him being Owe. Bud Dupree, as a side note, played 34% of the snaps. Deion Henley played 96% of the snaps, and it came out that he was playing with a very heavy heart as his brother was killed the night before the game, or 2 nights before the game, I'm not sure. But that came out afterwards. So even with that, he only played 45 snaps. He did okay from a tackles perspective, not putting up the types of numbers overall we want, but it is hard to put up the tackle numbers we want when they're only playing 47 snaps. Now, he did have an interception that kind of bailed him out. But Deion Henley is not a number 1 linebacker. He's more of a number 2 at this point in time, mainly because he's getting almost 100% of the snaps. But right now, he's not playing as a high-end number 2 linebacker even. Denzel Perriman was 2nd in linebacker snaps at 64%. Troy Dye all the way down to 9%. So while Dye kind of was very effective from an IDP perspective and getting a lot of snaps and stats for us when Perryman was out injured, that party is over. I'm going to say that party is over for now, because what do we know about Denzel Perryman if you've been playing IDP for a while? He always freaking gets hurt. So expect him to get hurt again, and when he does, Dye will get in and play about 7% of the snaps and maybe do a decent job in deeper leagues. Okay. Derwin James played his normal 100%, and he played 91% of those snaps close to the line of scrimmage, which we love. Derwin James, Kyle Hamilton, man, with them playing that much close to the line of scrimmage, we love them. Basically makes them top 3, top 4 linebacker. Safeties, those 2, because they're playing like a linebacker type of role with safety eligibility. Elijah Molden played 100% of the snaps, and there was no rotation this week with Tony Jefferson being out. So you had Moden at 100% along with James at 100%. R.J. Mickens, the rookie, played 83% of the snaps. I do worry if Jefferson is back, does Moden still play 100% of the snaps and all, as a side note? But at the cornerback position, Tarheeb still was out, and no cornerback played more than 80% of the snaps. Now, remember, this was against the Titans. It was a bit of a blowout late in the game, so you got to be careful what you read out of this. But Ricky's takeaway, you play Derwin James with confidence. In very deep leagues, you can consider playing Elijah Moden. If he doesn't play 100%, maybe he plays 84, 85%, somewhere. That range is my gut. And then you have Jefferson Mickens kind of rotating in as well. Okay? Particularly with Still out, who's playing that slot cornerback role. That's why I think you see Jefferson Mickens in some sort of rotation along with Moden, because Moden was a cornerback, remember, at one point in his career, who's moved to safety. So Moden could play some of that a little bit in the slot as well. So that is the Chargers. That completes the AFC. And Ricky has got to get something to drink here, folks. I'm dying. And there's not a pause button on the recording, so otherwise I would have paused it, but I can't do that. Otherwise, I got to start a whole new broadcast, and I'm not going to do that. So let's move on to the Dallas Cowboys as I record the timestamp here. And the Cowboys played 67 snaps versus the Cardinals. Shawn's words, Kenneth Murray sucks. Okay, he's right there with Cody Barton. Shawn is almost positive, this is his quote, that Kenneth Murray and Cody Barton are actually the same person. That probably rates about a 9 on the sarcasm meter. Shamar James played 87% of the snaps. Now, earlier we mentioned Logan Wilson was traded to the Dallas Cowboys. If the Cowboys felt that good about Kenneth Murray, and I don't see how they can given the run defense, they're not trading for Logan Wilson. DeMarvion Overshown is also slated to be activated. Now, remember, the Cowboys are going on bye this coming week 10. So as we go into week 11, I expect Overshown to be activated. What does that mean? I think you have two primary new starting linebackers for the Dallas Cowboys. I believe you're going to see Logan Wilson and DeMarvion Overshown. The caveat with Overshown in his first game back is that he potentially does a rotation thing with Shamar James. I think Kenneth Murray is in big trouble. I wouldn't be surprised to see them release him, quite frankly. And, it's past the trade deadline, but with Wilson not even getting to practice, I don't see how they could release him until they kind of see how things play out a little bit before they let him go. But Murray will get released at some point is my bet or gut. So if you can, try and trade Murray, and try and sell them on the fact that it'll be Murray and Logan Wilson playing when that won't be the case. So I really expect it to be Logan Wilson and Overshown. Once again, Overshown, Shamar James rotation week 1, week of Overshown's return. The following week after that, then you see Wilson and Overshown as the primaries. Where there's third linebacker, maybe you see Shamar James as the third linebacker. Maybe it's still Maris Lufau. Either way, Lufau, Shamar James, doesn't matter. Their playing time is going on the 2. In addition to Murray, I'm trying to sell on Shamar James as well, particularly going into this bye week here. Before, more of this becomes public and people really start thinking through what it means for the Cowboys linebacker position. The Cowboys also acquired Quinnen Williams. Now, I've talked in this show about my concern about Quinnen Williams playing for the Jets, and the Jets being so bad that as the year progresses, Quinnen Williams gets frustrated, pouts, doesn't give his all, etc. Now, it's not like he has 20 sacks this year. He only has 1, but he's a former 3-time All-Pro. He's only 28 years old, so he's not that old. And I do think he'll make a difference for the Cowboys defense, and with the Cowboys notoriety and publicity that they get, not that the Jets don't get any publicity, they get the wrong kind of notoriety. But I think Quinnen Williams, I think he'll be jazzed to play for the Cowboys. And I think he'll be starting next to Kenny Clark. Oza Odigizua is going to be the odd man out. He'll be the number 3 defensive tackle. Solomon Thomas drops to the number 4 tackle. Time for the sarcasm meter. meter. Solomon Thomas played 39% of the snaps as the number 3 defensive tackle this past week. Jay Toya, who? Yes, Jay Toya played 30% of the snaps. I think he was a 7th-round pick, and I think he was out of UCLA. But if that's what you're playing as your 4th defensive tackle with 30% of the snaps, you needed help. So Toya, bye-bye. Thomas, even I think his 39% is going to slip. And I think you see a 3-man rotation of Williams, of Kenny Clark, and Odigizua. But still, Odigizua will take a hit in his snap count as well. So those are my thoughts on the defensive tackle position and linebacker position for the Cowboys after these trades. Moving to the edge, Donovan Izuruku, where I've been talking the past several weeks about how they've been playing 5 or 6 players on the edge. They played 6 players on the edge again, and only one was usually barely getting over 50%. This week, Izuruku played 76% of the snaps at the edge. Jadeveon Clowney played 57% as the number 2. No one else played more than 50% of snaps on the edge, even though Donnie Fowler started the game. He did get injured, but he didn't get nearly those snaps. So I think you're going to start seeing Izuruku and Clowney get more playing time with some rotation with the Sam Williams and Marshawn Nealon, maybe a little bit James Houston mixed in, et cetera, and Dante Fowler a little bit as well. But I think you can see primarily Izuruku and Clowney. And Clowney, if he plays about 6% of the snaps, is someone that has been productive. And even last year, in the last half of the year with Carolina, we saw him being very productive there. So Clowney in your deeper leagues is someone to look at from an edge perspective. Now, Sam Williams blocked the punt. If you got scoring for that, don't let that distract you from the fact that he only played 36% of the snaps. Marshawn Nealon got a bunch of points probably because he got a touchdown off of that block punt, but he only played 25% of the snaps. Don't get carried away with those two. Get rid of all these other edges except for Izuruku and Clowney and say goodbye to the rest of them. Deron Bland played outside cornerback, and Arizona targeted him 13 times. He had 14 tackles in total to lead the team. And, boy, no other cornerback played more than 61% of the snaps. Trayvon Diggs was out. I expect Siobhan Revel to be back after the bye. He's the rookie that got injured in college, who they've been slowly bringing back, and I expect him to get more playing time as well. So at some point, we'll see Diggs and Revel on the outside. I think it's Revel, not Revel. But we see those two on the outside. We see Bland back to the inside to his slot position where he has thrived the most. Of course, Bland being targeted that much was very, very unusual as a side note, okay? But that's how I think it's going to be post the bye, assuming Diggs can make it back. And I can't remember. I think Diggs may have been put on IR, so it may still be on the other side. There's Kyer Elam, Kalen Carson, maybe Trequaze Bridges. We don't want any of those guys, folks. We don't even want Diggs right now. He had one good year because he got a bunch of interceptions. That was about it. So Revel could be one of these rookies if he does start playing 90% on the outside, who could get targeted a lot, just like Darian Porter. And he may be someone we can consider, but that's for down the road to take a look at. Donovan Wilson was out at safety. He should be back after the bye. Marquise Bell and Wanye Thomas were the starting safeties, with Bell playing the box role, Thomas playing the deep role. Bell will go back to the bench. Donovan Wilson will come back in. Donovan Wilson will be a yo-yo for you if you have him on your roster. And Wanye Thomas, because he's playing that deep safety role, we do not want our team. Okay, let's move to the Giants now. And the Giants played 66 snaps versus the 49ers. Starting at linebacker, Okereke tied for the team leading tackles at 14 on the 66 snaps, which was very nice to see from Okereke. We don't see that on a regular basis. But when Christian McCaffrey is running the ball up the middle that much, that contributes to Okereke getting one of those tackles when McCaffrey is averaging not quite 4 yards a carry. But Darius Muasau left the game with an ankle injury after 21% of the snaps. Demetrius Flanagan Fowles replaced him and played 70% of the snaps. So between the two, that's 91% of the snaps. Simple math, of course. In deeper leagues, Flanagan Fowles is someone that you can consider playing as like a number 4 linebacker. He's going to have that Micah McFadden role, who when McFadden played like 80% of the snaps or so, 85% of the snaps, that role was hyper efficient from a tackling perspective, and Flanagan Fowles could do that for us, as he kind of did in the snaps that he played this past week. So someone to consider if you're desperate, bye week, etc. 4 teams on bye this coming week, that you could potentially pick him up and slot him in if Muasau is out. That's a big if. We have to see more. Brian Burns now leads the league in sacks after recording his 11th sack of the season. He played a whopping 83% of the snaps. Kayvon Thibodeau was 70%. Abdul Carter was down 59%. Now, Abdul Carter might have bailed you out if you did play him because he got that fumble recovery when Brian Burns actually hit the quarterback and the ball kind of flew in the air, and from Mac Jones, and Carter caught in the air. But his pass rush win rate is continuing to do fairly well for a rookie. But Carter is someone that's hard to play right now, even though the excitement of the rookie is still there. Jevon Holland was out. Dane Belton replaced him, and Belton played 62% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage. Newman played 52% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage, playing basically 100% of the snaps. At the cornerback position, Paulson Adebo and Cordell Flott were both out. Deontay Banks, who you can call him toast because he's always get burned, or bad toast because he's always get burnt, okay? And then on the other side, Corey Black played 77%, and Jared Bernard-Converse, yes, from LSU, played the other 23%. Black was getting abused so bad that they gave Bernard-Converse an opportunity there. Hopefully one of Adebo or Flott will be back to at least help out on that one side. But, this is an ugly situation with the Giants cornerbacks right now. I don't remember who's playing them this coming week, but if we see these injuries and Adebo and Flott still out, giddy up with the wide receivers that are going against the Giants. Drew Phillips is primarily a slot cornerback. They didn't, even with Black and Bernard-Converse and Banks all struggling, Phillips only played 29% of the snaps. He is a slot cornerback. That's how they're using him. They're not playing him on the outside. He is not like the Dax Hill type that I described earlier. If you missed it, go listen to the Cincinnati. You can, you'll be able to click on the timestamps to go and listen to that. So anyway, Drew Phillips, you got to make sure they're going to be playing a lot of 3 wide. The 49ers, with all the injuries at wide receiver, they do play multiple tight ends a lot. That wasn't a good matchup for Drew Phillips, and it certainly played out that way. Dane Belton, by the way, tied Okereke for the team leading tackles at 14. If Holland's out again, you can feel confident playing Belton. The Eagles were on bye last week, but as I talked about, I did say I was going to come and talk about all their trades that they made and the implications. When we talked about Miami, I mentioned how Phillips was now going to be playing for Fangio, who he played for with the Dolphins, so he knows the system. He should be able to slide in right away. With where the Eagles' edge situation is, and remember, I mentioned Phillips had been playing 80% of the snaps, roughly 80% of the last few weeks with the Dolphins. I expect that to continue with the Eagles here, even in his first week there coming up. So giddy up on Jalen Phillips. His pass rush win rate for PFF is continuing to improve. The sacks have started to come with it. Love some Jalen Phillips here for the rest of the year. Nolan Smith had his 21-day window open today to begin practicing to come off of IR. Not clear if he'll come off this week. Brandon Graham unretired. Josh Uche has done okay in limited snaps, more as a pass rusher than as a run stopper. The Eagles also released Patrick Johnson today from the active roster, though I expected them to sign him to the practice squad tomorrow. Why am I bringing all that up? I think you're going to have, despite all of that noise, I don't think it impacts Phillips. But I do expect that it's going to impact Jihad Campbell, because I really believe now that Nakobe Dean will be in the 85 to 90% of the snap count range next to Zach Bond as they come out of bye. So Campbell doesn't have that spot in the box at the inside linebacker position. And with Phillips and Graham and Smith potentially coming back, Campbell's going to lose snaps on the edge. Bad news for playing time for Campbell right now. Maybe if Nolan Smith isn't activated, there's one more week, but he hasn't been, being Campbell, hasn't been efficient from a tackling perspective and hasn't really gotten the sacks from the edge yet. And maybe he does play a little bit more with Dean, and Dean maybe doesn't quite get to the 89% range, but I do think he will. Maybe they do decide they want to give Campbell 15, 20%, but that's about it. It doesn't, in general, but in total, it doesn't bode well for Jihad Campbell. You can't play Campbell, but I'm keeping him for Dynasty, but for redraft, back to the Backstreet Boys. Bye, 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 Jihad Campbell. Okay, that's the situation with Phillips. Let's move to the secondary. They acquired Jair Alexander, who's an outside cornerback, but who hasn't been playing very much for Baltimore. And they acquired Michael Carter II from the Jets, who has been their primary slot cornerback. I think they give Alexander the first try to play on the outside across from Quinion Mitchell to leave Cooper DeJean in the slot. If that fails, or if Alexander gets hurt, which, given his injury history, there's a high probability that can happen. If that happens, I believe the Eagles are going to be forced to move DeJean to the outside and put Michael Carter II in the slot. Now, do I think it'll be one of those situations where DeJean and Mitchell are on the outside, and then if they go to three wide, maybe DeJean goes to the inside? I don't see that happening right now. I think Alexander's going to start there, but he won't be successful. And DeJean and Mitchell stay on the outside, and Carter's going to be in the slot, folks. I think this is bad news for Cooper DeJean because Adoree Jackson hasn't done it. Ja'Cory Bennett hasn't done it. Keely Ringo hasn't done it. Eli Ricks hasn't done it. They tried them all. They're trying to find someone for the outside to not put DeJean there, but they're running out of options as we get closer and closer to playoff time and playoff positioning. That's going to be needed with more and more wins as the season comes, as we start getting to the second half of the regular season here to try and get that home field advantage for the playoffs. So I'm a little bit worried about DeJean. I could be wrong, but it is something to monitor and be careful of. I might be starting to look for a cornerback contingency if DeJean is my only cornerback on my roster and I only have to play one cornerback. Okay, moving to the Commanders now. Sorry, I had to record that real quick. The Commanders played 51 snaps versus the Seahawks. Frankie Louvu played 100% of the snaps. Once again, he played a significant portion on the edge, which hurt his tackling numbers, and he's almost non-playable if he doesn't get a sack. Now, Louvu was also suspended for one game because of his third hip drop tackle of the year. He's been fined 2 other times. Now, that is good news, and that opens the door more for Jordan McGee. McGee played 84% of the snaps 2 weeks ago. This past week, he played 51% of the snaps, even though they indicated he was going to play roughly the same amount. That didn't happen. But this is good news for him in the upcoming week. So I think we'll see a lot of Wagner and a lot of McGee in the box, with McGee getting roughly that 85% of the snaps. And I don't know what the Commanders are going to do for an edge rush. Jacob Martin did play 63% of the snaps on the edge, but didn't exactly see a lot of sacks from Martin as we were seeing in the previous weeks. Von Miller only played 25%. Preston Smith played 22%. It appeared when I was watching some of that game that Daron Payne was getting some snaps on the edge. That's not good for him either, depending on how much they played him out there. I do not have the exact numbers, folks, so I don't want to get carried away with this, but if they have to leverage him in that role and use the Kinlaws and the Goldmans and the Newtons on the inside, and maybe even Newton a little bit on the edge as well, potentially, that's not good for Payne or Newton, if that's what they're doing. And that's certainly not going to generate the pass rush that is needed. So it hurts. It's going to hurt Payne. That's just not a good situation. Stay away from all of those folks. Is the net of it. In the secondary for the Commanders, Lattimore suffered a torn ACL. Amos had a hip injury. Quan Martin had a hamstring injury. With all of that happening, particularly the cornerback position with Lattimore and Amos, who went in and out of the game, Sanders still only played 55% of the snaps. Jonathan Jones returned from IR, and he took some of those outside cornerback snaps that Lattimore and Amos were getting when they were out of the game. That is bad news for San Francisco if he's primarily just a slot cornerback and he doesn't get outside snaps as well as those slot snaps. We'll continue to watch this, and maybe with the injuries with Lattimore and Amos and so forth, they're forced to play him on the outside and then in the slot as well. But they also have Noah Igbenamine, who, if I remember correctly, was inactive. But if those other two are still hurt, Sanders still may stay on the outside, and Igbenamine may play the slot role. Overall, this feels really bad news for Sanders still right now, and someone that I really liked. He's not having the same year he had last year, and this usage could hurt him even more. That completes things for the Washington Commanders. We're going to move to the NFC North and move to the Chicago Bears now. And the Chicago Bears played 68 snaps versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Tremaine Edmonds rebounded, had a great game on 100% of the snaps. TJ Edwards only played 76% of the snaps. He missed a drive in the first quarter. I believe it was 11 or 12 snaps that he missed because of that. Apparently he was injured. He may have even gone to the locker room and then came back out. Then played, the second, third. And then in the fourth quarter, though, when the game clearly was not over, even though they had gotten that big lead, but then Cincinnati kind of climbed back into that thing by surprise, Edwards sat out a lot of that fourth quarter. Was it the injury? Was it something else that they weren't happy with his performance? If you had Noah Sewell and you hadn't dropped him yet, which I hadn't done in one of my leagues, I'd hold on to him for another week. Let's check the injury report for Edwards from the Bears that we'll start seeing here on Wednesday. And let's see if he's on the injury report. But even with that, if it's not an injury, it would worry. If he's not on the injury report, it would worry me even more. And I definitely want to keep Sewell on my roster. Okay. Moving to the edge position, Deo Odeyingbo was lost for the season with a torn Achilles. You may recall that coming out of Vanderbilt, he also tore an Achilles. I do not know if it was the same leg or not, but either way, that is not good because it took Odeyingbo a while to come back to be somewhat productive off of that first Achilles tear. It's bad news for him. Austin Booker, who had just been activated from IR, Austin Booker played 54% of the snaps in his first game back, and he did get a sack. Now, I do caution that sack was against the Bengals, okay? And that horrid offensive line that they had. And I know you could say that, well, Flacco was trying to get the ball out very quickly and all that kind of stuff. But we want to be careful about getting too excited. The Bears did trade for Tryon Shoyinka from the Browns to take up some of the snap count that Odeyingbo has lost. I wouldn't be surprised if Tryon Shoyinka even starts. But remember, he was a former first-round pick that the Bucs were happy to release and not pick up his fifth-year option, that the Browns were happy to trade for a late-round pick swap, which is basically worthless. So that's all you need to know about Tryon Shoyinka. If you can take a gamble, I'm taking a gamble on Booker, trying to stash him in deeper leagues to see how this plays out. He's had some great preseason performances, and I know people get excited about preseason performances when he's playing against a third-string offensive lineman. So we want to be careful. But Booker did have some upside. He probably came out of college 1 year too early, and was part of the reason he fell to the fifth round. Might have gone in the late second or early third if he would have gone back to college for another year. So there is some potential there, but let's not get overly excited on a sack against the Bengals offensive line. Now, I can't remember if it was on this show or the Start Sit show, but I talked about the fact how the Bears had signed Chauncey Gardner-Johnson Jr., CGJG, or whatever the acronym is. I might have just butchered that. CJGJ. Yeah, that's what it's supposed to be. Gardner Johnson played for Dennis Allen with the Saints. He knows Dennis Allen's system. Kyler Gordon went on IR, and I talked about the fact, could Gardner Johnson move into that role? Or I said maybe he moves into the Brisker role if they're potentially disappointed with Brisker, but really thought he might move into that slot role. Sure enough, that is where Gardner Johnson played. And what did he do in that role? He only played 59% of the snaps. Now, he did get a sack, and if I remember correctly, he had 4 tackles. So, but only 59% of the snaps. Tyreek Stevenson was one of the outside cornerbacks along with Nashawn Wright. And Tyreek Stevenson got hurt and only played 72% of the snaps. Nick McLeod, who had been playing the slot position while Kyler Gordon was out, then started playing on the outside. So was part of this Gardner Johnson, one, he only played 59% of the snaps, but did he get even more simply because McLeod had to go play on the outside with Stevenson's injury? That is a possibility, folks. But I still think that Dennis Allen preferred Gardner Johnson over McLeod. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't have signed him. If Stevenson is out, there's no questions asked because then you have McLeod and Wright on the outside and Gardner Johnson gets to play the slot. But with Kyler Gordon, remember, Kyler Gordon was only getting 70 to 80% of the snaps. He wasn't getting a ton of snaps in the slot role. Once again, if the Bears are playing someone with a lot of 3 wide, that will help Gardner Johnson be successful in that slot role. But if not, be careful about using him. And particularly since he's a safety designation in most leagues right now, and if he's only playing 50 or 60% of the snaps, that could hurt you in that scoring system. Okay? So that's what to watch on the Bears in the defensive secondary. Let's move to the Lions here. And the Lions played 62 snaps versus the Vikings. Across from Aiden Hutchinson, you have a rotation going right now with Tyler Lacey at 50%, Al-Qadim Muhammad at 48%. That is a rotation. I actually took a gamble, picked up Al-Qadim Muhammad in one league, hoping for a sack against the Vikings, that either J.J. McCarthy would hold it too long or the 2 tackles, Darisaw and O'Neal, were banged up and that he could get by. And luckily, he did get 1 sack, thank goodness, because otherwise he would have given me a goose egg. Not recommending him. Took that gamble for 1 week. Would not recommend that going forward. At the linebacker position, Jack Campbell got a sack and 9 tackles. Continues to be a number 1 linebacker, and expect that for the rest of the year. He and Anzalone and even Derek Barnes all played 100% of the snaps. Barnes plays this outside edge / third linebacker, Sam linebacker type of position. Has been pretty effective considering that utilization. There's probably other linebackers you could start ahead of him, but not the worst play right now. Hell, I'd probably play Barnes over Terrell Bernard for perspective, just to, in terms of where my head is. A lot of the Lions' secondary returned from injury. Brian Banch returned from his suspension, though Kirby Joseph remained out, and Thomas Harper, not Eric Hallett. Eric Hallett was even made inactive before the game. Thomas Harper was the one that played basically 100% of the snaps in Kirby Joseph's absence. No word yet on Kirby Joseph's knee and when he will be back, or if he'll be back this coming week. A side note, Arthur Maulet, the journeyman, Maulet, he played 29% of the snaps in the slot. Once again, they used 3 linebackers, so not a whole lot of slot usage as a result. That's the Lions story. There's not a whole lot to talk about there. So let's go to the Green Bay Packers, folks. And the Green Bay Packers played 58 snaps versus the Panthers. So once again, less than the 65 average for those that maybe are skipping around and not listening to the whole thing. Now, the Packers had, as Shawn pointed out, the Packers had a pretty sweet matchup against the Panthers' banged up offensive line. And as he put on the sarcasm meter, I give it an 8. So obviously, Micah Parsons at 91% of the snaps and Rashawn Gary at 71% of the snaps combined for 0 sacks and 0 quarterback hits against the Panthers, that banged up offensive line, and Bryce Young. Of course, that's what happened. Sarcasm meter, we'll give it an 8 on second thought. Kobe Wooden was hurt at the defensive tackle position, so Devontae White and Carl Brooks both played a nice 69% of the snaps. Devontae White is still someone, particularly in big play leagues. He continues to do well from a pass rush perspective. It's not quite translating to the sacks we like, but as he continues to recover from that injury that had, which if I recall correctly was an ankle, I think we'll start seeing a couple more sacks from Wyatt as the year progresses. Quay Walker had a calf concern. He went from a full practice on Wednesday to did not practice on Thursday to limited on Friday. Freaked out a lot of owners. The good news, he was active. And not only was he active, he played 100% of the snaps. So did Edgerrin Cooper. Nate Hobbs was injured, which could be good news for Packers secondary playing time. There was there were 6 players that were primary playing, and outside of Keyshawn Nixon and Xavier McKinney, 4 of them had this weird rotation, causing them to not play the number of snaps we would like. Well, for Carrington Valentine, the last 3 weeks, going backwards from current to oldest, 74, 98, 3% of the snaps. Javon Bullard, 72, 78, 80%. Evan Williams, last 3 weeks, 88, 78, 84% of the snaps. With Hobbs out of the picture, I think Valentine is close to 100% on the outside, along with Keyshawn Nixon. Williams plays roughly 85% of the snaps, with McKinney at 100%, and Bullard plays roughly 85% of the snaps, with Bullard getting the slot snaps along with a few Evan Williams snaps. For some reason, they continue to do a little bit of that with Bullard and Williams. They expect a little bit of that to continue, maybe not as much because Hobbs is out. But so some good news probably for the playing time for all those, and that's how I think the Packers are going to shake out there. That's really the Packers story, folks. Let us now move to the Minnesota Vikings, who played 64 snaps versus the Lions. Javon Hargrave, who, have to admit, we were saying it was okay to drop him because his snap count had just fallen off the cliff, fallen through the roof, fallen through the floor, whatever analogy you want to use, going downwards. All of a sudden, he jumps back up to 61%, which he hadn't seen anything close to that high since week 4, and he came with 8 tackles and a sack. Do I feel comfortable with trusting that? Not quite yet. I'm not quite putting in my lineup right now. Jonathan Allen played 80%, Jalen Redmond 91%. Levi Drake Rodriguez dropped all the way down to 17%. I'm going to be watching injury reports. I didn't see anything reported on Levi Drake Rodriguez. Maybe he was injured, and that's why Hargrave jumped back up. But notice nowhere near where Allen and Redmond were playing. So hard to trust. If Drake Rodriguez is on the injury report, there's our answer. And if Drake Rodriguez ends up playing, we got to be hesitant about playing Javon Hargrave. Okay. Andrew Van Ginkel returns from being injured, played 61% of the snaps. I didn't realize it was only his 3rd appearance of the year, and his second one was when he hurt his neck, which meant another wave of him missing games. So nice to see him back. Nowhere near the 80 or 90% of the snaps we were seeing like last year, but they could be easing him back in. He only played 61% of snaps. Jonathan Grenard played 97% of the snaps. Dallas Turner took a major hit in snap count all the way down to 22%. That's how great they don't feel about Dallas Turner. That they would have Grenard play 97% and Turner only 22% with Van Ginkel coming back. Not a great sign for Dallas Turner. Talked about earlier in the year and even in the preseason, we talked about how light he is in the pants, having trouble stopping the run, etc. He's not really rushing the passer and getting great pass rush metrics from PFF, although he did get it 1 sack, but still can't count on Dallas Turner. I'm trying to probably trade him in Dynasty right now. We'll just leave it at that. Blake Cashman, 100% linebacker. Eric Wilson, 88%. Again, 2nd week in a row. Clearly the number 2 linebacker over Ivan Pace. Even picked up a couple of sacks. They rushed him quite a bit in watching, that game. Didn't watch the whole game, but it seems like every time I watched him, he was seemed to be blitzing from that linebacker. Was that, from that inside linebacker position? Because Jared Goff does struggle with inside pressure. Maybe that's what they're trying to do. So will Eric Wilson blitz as much, and can we expect 2 sacks every week? Absolutely not. But Eric Wilson playing roughly 80% of the snaps in this Vikings defense, you can play him as a probably number 4 linebacker. Theo Jackson went to concussion protocol, only played 16 snaps. Harrison Smith falls back to earth with only 3 tackles. He did play 100% of the snaps. 9 tackles 2 weeks ago, 3 tackles this past week, as I mentioned. He only played 53% of the deep, which is not horrendous. It means 47% close to the line of scrimmage. But he did not deliver for us, folks, and that's Harrison Smith, and he's 36 years old. So you got to keep that in mind. And remember, there was a mysterious illness at the beginning of the year, which, because we don't know it is, that's a risk as the season progresses as well, because we just don't know if there could be some sort of relapse. So Harrison Smith is not someone we're keeping, folks. Okay, we're going to take a quick swig here. And now we're going to move to the NFC South, and we're going to move to the Atlanta Falcons, who played 68 snaps versus the Patriots. As we talked about it, hopefully you were paying attention to us, whether it be this show last week or the Sunday Start Sit show. J.D. Bertrand was absolutely put into a timeshare. He only played 44% of the snaps. Ronnie Harrison, the former safety who they had signed, who was moved from safety to linebacker during his career, played 60% of the snaps. So Bertrand played basically the run snaps. Harrison played the passing snaps, basically. Caden Ellis is the only one you can start from this bunch currently at linebacker for the Falcons. Divine Diablo is not supposed to be out all year. He is supposed to come back from that arm injury that he had. But do not play Bertrand, folks. And by the way, don't play Ronnie Harrison either. On the edge, Jalen Walker played 65% of the snaps. I believe that was a season/career high for him. The most of any of the defensive ends/edges for the Falcons, and delivered 2 sacks and 5 tackles and a forced fumble. Very, very nice game for the rookie. And I have to admit, I'm pleasantly surprised by that. Now, the Patriots offensive line has struggled, and where Drake May has taken, he does have a high pressure to sack ratio percentage, does Drake May. So he doesn't help his O-line out a whole lot. Keep that in mind for defenses that are playing against the Patriots. But Jalen Walker appears to have leapfrogged James Pierce, who his snap count came down from 71% all the way to 49% week over week. So massive drop there. Arnold Ebiketie actually played 50% of snaps. Now, Leonard Floyd did get injured during this game and left with, I believe it was 26% of the snaps, if I remember correctly. So will it be Floyd and Jalen Walker starting to be your starters with Ebiketie and Pierce your backups? That's what it could be when Floyd is back from injury. Just keep that in mind. Brandon Darlis and Laquel London, 2 sacks each. Are we chasing that? I think we've learned, if you've been following us week over week, we do not chase these 1 week outliers. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Did I mention don't do it? Leave Darlis, leave London on the waiver wire. Okay. London usually plays about 25% of the snaps roughly. Darlis has been creeping up in snap counts, but he's not that explosive type that we are looking to add at this point in time. Maybe if this trend continues and we start seeing more tackles and higher playing time, maybe, but we're not there yet with Brandon Darlis or Ruhi or Horo either. Okay. At the safety position, Jesse Bates had been playing a significant percentage of snaps in the box. He played 53% in this past week, which is much lower than he had been playing, but not shabby, don't get me wrong. Xavier Watts only played 34% deep, and he played 66% close to the line of scrimmage. Was this because of the Patriots matchup and the fact that, particularly once Kayshon Boutte left with a hamstring from LSU, that they weren't worried about anybody challenging them deep, and thus they were comfortable creeping these safeties close to the line of scrimmage and maybe only playing 1 deep or things along those lines? Yeah, that's a possibility and all. So anyway, I'm not getting too excited about Watts playing that close to the line of scrimmage. I don't think that's going to continue on a regular basis, but still excited to have Bates and want to have, happy to have Bates on my roster as a number 2 safety. Billy Bowman Jr. continued to be out. Thus, D. Alford was the slot cornerback, but in this matchup against the Patriots, he only played 46% of the snaps. That concludes the Falcons. Let's now move to the Panthers here. And the Panthers played 65 snaps versus the Green Bay Packers. Christian Roseboom had 15 tackles on only a 74% snap share. That's freaking amazing. That's a mega efficient tackler. And that's been his story. Maybe not the best athlete, but he delivers the tackles. Trevin Wallace was active. He was questionable, but they made him active. Continued to wear the green dot. Second on the team with tackles with 9, but he played 97% of the snaps. So 97% of the snaps, 9 tackles for Wallace. Roseboom, 74% of the snaps, 15 tackles. Maybe Roseboom just thrives better not wearing the green dot and not have to coordinate everybody and just see ball, hit ball, tackle man. I mean, that's kind of how Roseboom is. And so you can continue to use him from that regard. On the defensive line, there's quite a change in the interior for the Panthers. Tershawn Turk Wharton, the former Kansas City Chief, who most people thought they overpaid for in free agency, they being the Carolina Panthers, played 91% of the snaps. Derek Brown played 82%, and Ashawn Robinson was all the way down to 49%. Didn't see any reports of Robinson having any injuries. Like to see Robinson back to that 60% range. We're going to watch the injury report of him as well, but this was very surprising that Wharton had such a massive jump in snaps. If he's going to continue to play those kind of snaps, now he hasn't been this massive sack producer in the past as Wharton, but maybe he can get you some tackles. So if you're desperate in a deep league, in a defensive tackle required league, maybe you consider Wharton, but there's probably others you can consider ahead of him. Okay. Nick Skirton played 78% of the snaps on the edge. DJ Wanham played 75% of the snaps on the edge. Okay, time for the sarcastic meter once again. Who else are they going to play on the edge besides those two? They got nobody else. That's not the best grammar in the world. Patrick Jones is on IR. Prince of Umela, the other rookie, was out for this game. They dropped DJ Johnson. Travis Gibson, who they just signed off the 49ers practice squad, played another 28%, and the rest was all dribs and drabs for others. I mean, they have nobody else. So as I talked about with Tennessee, when I talked about Jihad Ward and Arden Key playing, 85+% of the snaps because they have nobody else, sometimes getting that volume on the edge can lead to, a few tackles and an occasional sack. And that's what you're going to get out of Skirton and Wanham. Wanham has always been a volume-based producer. On limited volume, he's not very good. But when he plays a lot of snaps, he tends to get a few tackles and an occasional sack. And Skirton is doing the same thing, the rookie right now. So that's where we are with the Panthers. And even if Princely comes back, I still expect Skirton in that mid-70s range and a chance to get some IDP stats. Do I like him for dynasty? Yes. Are there a lot of other players I want to play over Skirton and over Wanham? Absolutely. Okay. Moving to the safety position. Trevor Wharton had 5 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 2 passive defenses, and an interception. Continue to love his utilization close to the line of scrimmage. And as my smart aleck partner, Sean Teague pointed out, my host partner on this show, that Morrig had an interception that Ricky could have made, is what he put into the quotes here. And he's probably right if you saw the interception. Nick Scott also played 100%. Lathan Ransom did get some run at safety after playing 0% the week before. He was back into the 40% range this week. I'm still shocked that Ransom hasn't leapfrogged Nick Scott yet. What I will say is, because the Panthers are surprisingly still in the playoff hunt, I'm still shocked because I think they suck overall. They're not Saints suck or Jets suck or Titans suck, but they suck. But there's, I believe 4-4 right now. And until they fall out of the playoff race, I guess we'll still see Scott over Lathan Ransom. Without a playoff race, then I think Ransom finally gets some run. All right, let's move and talk about my New Orleans Saints, folks. And they played a whopping 80 snaps against the Rams in this blowout game, and it was as bad as I expected. And, to help out their offense, which was really struggling, I get trading Rashid Shaheed for a 4th and 5th round pick, as they did today. And by the way, I love Rashid Shaheed in Seattle as the number 2 target, along with JSN from Sam Darnold. And he played in the Clint Kubiak system with the Saints last year. Kubiak was the offense coordinator for the Saints last year. Now with the Seahawks, Shaheed should jump right on in there. Love that. I didn't love them trading Trevor Penning for a 6th round pick. Particularly, it's going to be a late 6th round pick from Seattle. Those are basically worthless. I'd rather have Penning trying to protect the young rookie quarterback Tyler Shuck than give him away for a 6th rounder, to be honest with you. Now, if they could have gotten a 3rd rounder for Ruiz, I would have much preferred that. But that didn't happen, and that's even worse for the Saints offense. But I did throw Shaheed in there, just FYI, because I did talk about trades, mostly IDP, but I threw in Shaheed there. Okay, back to the Saints. Chase Young and Carl Granderson played 60% of the snaps on the edge. Cam Jordan, Chris Rump played 40% each. Nice round 100%, okay, for each. Chase Young, another sack. He's had at least a half a sack in 3 straight games. Told you all that to go out and pick him up. I predicted in the preseason that I thought Chase Young was going to have a breakout and be a top 24 scorer this year at the edge position. Now, unfortunately, because of the injuries, he's not there. He might get there on a points per game basis if we look at it that way. But love the way Chase Young is playing and the way he's utilized in this Brandon Staley defense. Don't love Brandon Staley's defense overall, but it's great for Chase Young. Carl Granderson, you can freaking drop at this point. When he was playing 85, 90%, 80% of the snaps, and he was getting some stats and looking into sacks, fantastic. His pass rush win rate has not been that great per PFF throughout the year, even though he was getting those sacks earlier in the year. He's actually droppable at this point in my mind. You could probably find a better edge. Maybe in the deepest of leagues, you don't drop him, but he is absolutely droppable right now. And somebody's going to scoop him up and say, wow, somebody was dumb enough to drop Granderson. Let him pick him up. That's where I am on him. At the linebacker position, Demario Davis played 100% of the snaps. Pete Werner, still in the 40% range, 41% 2 weeks ago, 48% this past Sunday against the Rams. Pete Werner, the end is here. And, people were saying, there's rumors about trading him to the Bears. There was no way the Bears were going to take him with that contract, by the way. And the Bears didn't need him because they had Sewell. I don't know where that rumor was coming from. That was stupid speculation. But anyway, Danny Stutzman was still only 29% of snaps. Isaiah Stolbert, 5%. So you add all those up with along with Werner's stats, and you get in that roughly 80% range. I'm still surprised that the Saints are playing Werner. I still expect Stutzman to get more playing time. I still expect Stolbert to go in there in passing snaps, very obvious passing situations, and Werner to just fall by the wayside. If you have a chance, if it's not too late, trade Werner, folks. The end is near, at least for the Saints. At least with the Saints for Werner. Giannis Sanker only played 53% of the snaps deep, which is much lower than previous games, and Justin Reed only played 34% deep. On Sanker, the reason I think that happened, I didn't get to check all this, but this is Ricky's speculation, folks, is it was a blowout game. The Rams were just running the ball. The Saints knew that was going to happen, and Nakua was out of the game, and they were throwing a bunch of the tight ends when they did throw, so they brought Sanker up, and he didn't play nearly as deep. And by the way, I do want to thank Justin Reed. Here comes a sarcasm meter of about a 6. I do want to thank Justin Reed for starting to play. The last 2 weeks, he's actually playing like the safety that the Saints drafted him to play. So if he's available in your deeper leagues based on his results in the past 2 weeks, I think you can pick up Justin Reed and potentially play him, particularly with the Saints offense going to be so bad, the Saints defense will be on the field so much, Justin Reed will have plenty of opportunities for tackles. That is the Saints, folks. The Bucks were on a bye. I think we need to watch out for. So let's move to them real quick. Hassan Reddick, I think, will be the one thing to watch as he's coming back from injury. Hopefully, a lot of people picked up Anthony Nelson on that big game he had against that Saints offense, that bad Saints offense, which won't be repeatable. And if Reddick is back, I expect him to move in the starting lineup. Anthony Nelson to go back to the bench into a little bit of a rotational role. And so that's the end of Anthony Nelson. That's your Buccaneers. Let's move to the Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals played 67 snaps on Monday night versus the Cowboys. Now, this was theoretically a bad matchup for edge players against the Cowboys. But Josh Sweat came through with 2 sacks and almost had a 3rd sack earlier in the game. So Sweat had a fantastic game on 67% of snaps. Calais Campbell, the old veteran, had played 57% of the snaps, and he also had 2 sacks. As Shawn likes to call it, they're both boomer bust players, but in particular in big play scoring systems, you can play Sweat, you can play Campbell. Walter Nolan, the rookie, was activated from IR, the first round pick. He was a disruptive force in his first game. Now, he had 4 tackles and a sack on 55% of the snaps. The Cardinals played 6 players on the interior of the defensive line along that front 3. And Campbell had the highest snap percent of 57, and Nolan in his first game had 55% over the likes of Dante Steele and PJ Mustipher, Darius Robinson, the former first-round rookie draft pick out of Missouri from last year. So that bodes well for Nolan. Now, will Nolan do this every week? No. Was a surprise he did it against the Cowboys offense? Yes, I was actually against that offensive line. So this bodes well for Nolan. And in deeper leagues, maybe he's a stash. Certainly in Dynasty, if for some reason someone dropped him because he was injured, we want to pick up Walter Nolan and put him on our benches, folks, and watch how this materializes. At the linebacker position for the Cardinals, Mack Wilson left with a rib injury after, as Shawn put it, sarcasm meter, getting the league-mandated 7 tackles that he seemed to often get in his career. Cody Simon is the one who picked up the extra snaps and got a very nice forced fumble with a peanut punch to knock the ball loose late in the game to basically seal the victory for Arizona. Akeem Davis-Gaither moved to the green dot when Mack Wilson left the game. Even with that, Akeem Davis-Gaither only played 72% of the snaps during the game. If Mack Wilson is out, I expect that to be in the 90+% range for ADG, with Cody Simon being the number 2 linebacker and probably playing in the 65% range. I wouldn't go chasing Cody Simon, even if Mack Wilson does not play with that rib injury that he sustained. But no word yet that Mack Wilson would definitely miss, and it could be that it is business as usual for the Cardinals linebackers. In the secondary, Garrett Williams returned from injury. Matt Melton was healthier. Will Johnson was healthier. I've been warning about this for weeks with all the cornerback injuries. It was the reason that Dadrian Taylor Demerson was getting about 50% of the snaps, and he was very effective from a tackling perspective on that 50% of the snaps. But I was warning that could come to an end. Sure enough, with Williams and Melton and Johnson and so forth, Taylor Demerson only played 12% of the snaps, where he had Budda Baker at 100% and Thompson missed a couple of snaps with an injury. He played about 97%, I believe it was. So that was temporary. I do want to keep and stash Taylor Demerson for Dynasty. I don't stash a lot of safeties, but he would be one I would staff with Jalen Thompson being a free agent. If they re-signed Jalen Thompson, that would be a different story. That hasn't happened yet. Now, Max Melton did get hurt, but even with that, Taylor Demerson still only played 12% of the snaps. Denzel Burke got a lot of run. He came in and did a very nice job, and you probably saw him make a couple of nice plays, particularly one late in the game when he went in for Melton. Melton hasn't been rolled out for this coming week, so Taylor Demerson, put him on the bench, folks. The Rams, moving on to the Rams. And they only have to play 41 snaps versus the Saints because the Saints offense, as I mentioned, stunk up the joint. Because of that, Nate Landman only played 38 snaps, which was 93%. So he played a high percentage, but with that, you're just not, 41 snaps, folks, that is about 2.5 quarters. You're not going to get a lot of IDP stats. So just as a reminder. Jared Verse and Byron Young both didn't register a sack. Now, the Saints tackles, Fuaga and Kelvin Banks, the rookie, have been holding up fairly well in pass protection. The interior, maybe not so much, but those two have done okay. Now, it was only 41 snaps as well, so we got to keep that in mind, which limits the opportunities. So we plan Verse and Young in future games, but just know that, the lack of snaps really hurt them. Quentin Lake and Cam Curl both played 100% of the snaps. The reason I wanted to call out Quentin Lake is I mentioned that the Rams did trade for Roger McCreary, who's primarily a slot cornerback, which is where Lake has played a lot of snaps. And that's what has made Lake so effective. What was interesting, Lake did play 100%, McCreary played 0%, and at the outside cornerback, Kobe Durant and Emmanuel Forbes played 100% of the snaps, both of them. It's the first time all year, I went back and checked this, that any cornerbacks for the Rams played 100% of the snaps in any game. And there's only one or two where they played more than 90% of all the games so far this year. So that says a lot about the cornerbacks. So maybe Roger McCreary does get some run on the outside. Maybe not if now they're going to go to Durant and Forbes, who played 100%. I still don't have a lot of confidence, particularly in Forbes. But I'm calling all this out because it's still unknown what's going to happen with McCreary. Could McCreary steal some snaps for Lake? Or does he steal snaps from Durant and Forbes? Or is he just going to be a backup? Something we're going to continue to watch. I'm playing Lake, but I'm a little bit nervous as an FYI. Okay. One last thing. Any team playing the Saints, particularly for the next several weeks, unless the light bulb really goes on for Tyler Shuck and so forth, the teams playing the Saints are going to be at risk of not playing a lot of snaps on defense. So if you're looking for tiebreakers of who to play and not to play, you got to keep that in mind. Let's move to the San Francisco 49ers, who only had to play 57 snaps on defense versus the Giants. And of course, if it's another week, you're going to have another defensive injury for the 49ers. Rookie Mikael Williams tore his ACL, is going to miss the rest of the season. Keon White, who they just acquired from the Patriots, ended up playing 58% of the snaps in his first game. No word yet on Bryce Huff returning. This creates some opportunities for Keon White, who I was really high on coming out of college, got off to a great start with the Patriots in his rookie year. And then, Belichick leaves. Now, two different head coaches, doesn't fit into the systems for either one, gets a fresh start in San Francisco. I'm going to be monitoring Keon White. I'm not running out to pick him up. I mentioned this last week. I wasn't running to pick him up. It's something I'm going to be monitoring. And he could end up getting, 70% of the snaps, which once again, when you're getting a lot of snaps, it gives you a chance to get those IDP stats, something definitely we want to keep an eye on. D. Winters, despite missing part of the previous game with a knee injury, was limited for a lot of the practices during the week, ended up playing the game, played 100% of the snaps. Tatum Bethune also played 100% of the snaps, and his tackle numbers since becoming a starter with Fred Warner getting injured, 10, 10, 14, and 16. On the sarcastic meter, we're going to give this one a 12, as Shawn called out that he can imagine Bethune getting about 30 tackles per game. The way it continues to increase from 10 to 10 to 14 to 16. By the end of the year, he'll have 30 in one game. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But Bethune is doing a very nice job from an IDP perspective, racking up those tackle numbers for us. At the safety position, Jair Brown and Malik Mustafa played both 100% of the snaps. Marquise Siegel, the rookie, wasn't even active for the game. He wasn't injured. He was declared inactive, not on the 47-man roster for the game. Jair Brown played 56% of snaps deep. Malik Mustafa only played 42% deep, meaning he played 58% close to the line of scrimmage. Mustafa is the one we'd rather have, but both are playing 100% of the snaps. That is your 49ers story, folks. And let us now move on to the Seattle Seahawks here. And for the Seattle Seahawks, they played 65 snaps versus the Commanders in what ended up being a blowout game. In that blowout, Devin Witherspoon returned from injury. Julian Love re-aggravated his injury and ended up getting put on the IR. So working backwards with Love, Ty Okada started next to Kobe Bryant, and Okada played 100% of the snaps. Kobe Bryant played in the 80% range because of the blowout game. He sat out late in the game. Devin Witherspoon started across from Josh Jobe. Tariq Woolen was on the bench, and you had Nicky Manwari playing this slot box close to the line of scrimmage role that we had Witherspoon playing in the past. So Iman Warren, remember, this was a blowout, played 88% of the snaps in that blowout, in that slot box role that Witherspoon played. And of course, we know that Witherspoon was very productive and a top 5 type of cornerback playing that role. Now, Witherspoon played primarily on the outside, and that is bad news for him if that continues. And if Job left the game with concussion and Woolen came in, So the signs would point to right now Job/Woolen and Witherspoon on the outside, Iman Wari in the slot close to the line of scrimmage and sort of playing the linebacker role as well, with Kobe Bryant and Okada at safeties and Okada there only until Julian Love comes back. If that's how it plays out, bad news for Witherspoon, great news for Iman Wari. And we can put him into our lineups if we've been stashing him and holding him and waiting for something to happen there. At the linebacker position, Ernest Jones left the game with a knee injury after only 43% of the snaps and did not return. He was ruled out, felt fairly quickly. When I went to start recording this here on the Tuesday night, November 4th, no word yet on the extent of the injury. I'm guessing he's going to miss at least some time. How bad is it? It feels like if it was an ACL injury, would have heard something by now, but probably something that he'll probably miss a couple of games. With that, Drake Thomas moves to the green dot and probably ends up playing 95+% of the snaps. Tyrese Knight probably plays about 70% of the snaps at the number 2 linebacker. Still not great for Tyrese Knight, but that's how it'll probably shake out if Ernest Jones is out. I don't expect Drake Thomas to put up Ernest Jones type numbers, but he should be a solid contributor. And remember, you have this wild card with Nicky Monwari, who started to play a third linebacker role. And maybe in some cases, Tyrese Knight is out and Iman Ward plays a number 2 linebacker and they bring in another defensive back. So don't jump on the Tyrese Knight bandwagon too quick, folks. On the edge for the Seahawks, it was a blowout game. They ended up playing 6 players on the edge, including the likes of Mike Morris. None of them played more than 50% of the snaps, so it's hard to get a read. Derek Hall was back, so hard to get a read of how the snaps are going to shake out between Nwosu, DeMarcus Lawrence, Mafe, Derek Hall. We'll have to see when there's a game that's more competitive in terms of how those snap counts are going to shake out. It feels like it'll be Nwosu and DeMarcus Lawrence, Derek Hall third, a drop off from there even to Mafe, who will be 4th, and then any others. That's how I think it's going to play out, but I'd like to see it actually happen. Byron Murphy continues to be a thumbs up for defensive tackle required leads, playing over 6% of the snaps at defensive tackle, and being what the Seahawks thought he would be when they drafted him in the first round last year at the University of Texas. And by gosh, you know what? We have made it through all 32 teams. I want to remind you that the Start Sit Show will be there this coming Sunday. Shawn will be there with me, 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central. We are giving all kind of great nuggets in that show, folks. So even if you might not have a specific question, you might learn some things that you weren't aware of, surprise, that might lead you to make changes to your starting lineup. I encourage you to come on in and listen to that show, 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central on this IDP Plus YouTube channel. If you like this show, please give it a thumbs up on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. If you have comments, questions, suggestions, please add those to the YouTube channel, and myself and Shawn will respond to them as quick as we can. We do go in there periodically. We don't live in it, but we go in there periodically and answer those questions. Except once we start getting to about 24 hours before the show, then we just wait till the Start Sit Show. So if you do it on a Saturday afternoon or evening, it's probably not going to get answered come to the Start Sit Show on Sunday. Give me a follow at RickyRod66 on X, Shawn Teague at Shawn8386. So with that, we'll be back next week as well to recap Week 10 and look ahead to Week 11 and beyond with our IDP Plus Advice Show. Start Sit Show once again this coming Sunday. On behalf of Shawn Teague, who couldn't join us this week, this is Ricky Rodrigue wishing you, your family, and your friends great health and happiness. Be kind to one another, and I am out of here till next time.